Story 1. My parents' neighbor's goddaughter went missing when she was a teenager in the 1980s. She left work, walked to the bus stop, and was never seen again. Police suspect she was one of the first victims of a convicted serial rapist who died in prison. They believe he did not intend to kill her, but something went wrong. Her mother, now in her 80s, has refused to move house and still leaves the porch light on and the back door unlocked in case her daughter comes home. Story 2. The 3 missing women from Springfield. I remember seeing the yellow missing posters everywhere when I was a child. To this day, there has been no trace of any of them. It is a tragic and horrifying case. The Springfield 3 refers to an unsolved missing persons case that began on June 7, 1992, when friends Suzanne Susie Streeter and Stacy McCall, along with Streeter's mother, Cheryl Levitt, went missing from Levitt's home in Springfield, Missouri, United States. All of their personal belongings, including cars and purses, were left behind. There were no signs of a struggle except for a broken porch light globe. There was also a message on the answering machine that police believe might have provided a clue about the disappearances, but it was inadvertently erased. Story 3. Susan Powell. I hope, in my lifetime, they find her body and lay her to rest with her children. The Cold podcast produces an incredible, in-depth season all about the case. Update. Shout out to Dave Colley Cold for his incredible work. Story 4. What happened to Andrew Gosden? Bright kid, buys a one-way train ticket, does not take his charger and just vanishes. Story 5. I am from Ireland, so the case for me would be the disappearance of Fiona Sinnott 27 years ago. She is from the same county as me. To this day, no one knows what happened, but everyone has their theories. The saddest part is her daughter, who was just about to turn 1, grew up without her mother. Story 6. Bob Crane's murder, June 1978. Bob Crane portrayed Robert Hogan in the classic television series Hogan's Heroes. He was murdered on June 29, 1978. This crime has not yet been solved. Story 7. Local case that surprisingly did not make much news outside of the immediate area. In 1997, concerned neighbors noticed mail had piled up on the porch of a 76-year-old reclusive retiree. She had no family, no known friends, and was rarely seen outside her home except for occasional bingo nights at church. Concerned by the increasing accumulation of mail, police were contacted for a wellness check. The doors and windows were locked from the inside with no signs of disturbance. Inside the home, the first and second floors were cluttered but showed no signs of a struggle. Inside the basement, however, told another story. The body of Mrs. Kenvin was found under a tarp in the middle of the floor. Items from the basement were piled on top of her. Her body was mutilated, with some internal organs missing, as were parts of her limbs. Police noted the mutilation was an intentional act made by a knife, not the result of animal activity or natural decay. She had no pets. The basement was sealed like the rest of the house and showed no signs of forced entry. Her cause of death was ruled a homicide by manual strangulation, and her case quickly went cold. In 2015, local police reopened her case and changed the cause of death from homicide to accidental death, releasing a statement that the mutilation was the result of an alleged pet cat. However, neighbors who knew her stated she had never owned a cat, and that there was no plausible way for her to have accidentally placed herself under a tarp and covered herself with large furniture and tools, as found. A retraction was made several months later, with police stating a review of crime scene photos indicated no presence of any pets. In 2016, a second inquiry was launched, and the case was reopened again. Her cause of death was once again listed as homicide by strangulation. However, police released no additional information until that October. In October of 2016, a local handyman died. Shortly after, police named him a lead suspect in Mrs. Kenvin's homicide. 2 men who worked with the deceased handyman issued statements after his death accusing him of being responsible for the crime. The allegations state that the handyman and both accusers had done work on the home prior to the woman's death. Upon completion of the work, Mrs. Kenvin was unable to pay the workers, and in retaliation, the now-deceased man strangled her to death, hid her body, and swore his co-workers to secrecy. Fearful of him, the other two workers did not report anything until after his death. The case was closed abruptly, and no charges were ever filed. Police released a statement that the men's stories lined up with information on the case that was not and will not be released. Many in the local area believe this to be a cover-up to allow the police to call the case closed. Some have pointed out inconsistencies in the originally released case information, the 2015 incident attempting to change the cause of death, and the mysterious handyman theory. Remaining neighbors who remembered Mrs. Kenvin are divided on whether work was actually being done on the home prior to her death. Some say they think they remember seeing a work truck, while others state the woman was not financially stable and would not have been able to make needed repairs. The home was demolished in 1999, taking all remaining physical evidence with it. Unfortunately, the truth died with Mrs. Kenvin. With the lead suspect deceased, the alleged co-conspirators unnamed, a lack of family or friends willing to fight for answers, and the police's refusal to disclose more information, we will never know what really happened to the 76-year-old recluse who enjoyed bingo and was found mutilated in her own basement. The case has always bothered me. The town has an established history of police corruption, and there are many rumors of police involvement in her death and several others from around the same time. Justice was never served, and while the case is considered closed, it only creates more questions than it answered. Story 8. I have spent almost all my life in an exceedingly peaceful place. Think about Frodo and Bilbo back in the Shire. Nobody locked their doors even overnight. There was no need to. We routinely left our keys in our cars in case someone wanted to use them. About 50 years ago, a little girl was playing with her friends in her own front yard on a fairly busy street when she vanished. Just disappeared. Gone. She was never seen again. We have suffered our share of tragedies in our community, but nothing has scarred the social conscience of our community like this case. We still talk about it as if it were yesterday. We probably always will. Story 9. The Kidnappings and Murder of Cindy James. Story 10. It may be technically solved or it may not be. The Ohio torso killer mostly preyed on the homeless. One whole body was found on the tracks by two teenage boys. It was completely drained of blood. Other victims were not identified because only their torsos were found. The murders took place in the 1930s. Authorities believe the killer was a local doctor. Story 11. And Gottlieb in Louisville disappeared in 1983 and was about my age. All they ever found was her bicycle leaning against a lamppost at a local mall. Police announced a suspect years after he had died. She has never been found. Story 12. That man in Columbus entered a bar and disappeared. Video surveillance covering all corners of the establishment showed that he was never seen leaving. Story 13. Jodi Huisentruit disappeared in 1995. She has been gone longer than she was alive, and no one knows what happened to her. Story 14. The Oakland County child murders. I live in the Detroit area of Michigan, and learning about these murders in the 1970s was disturbing. My parents were children in the area while these unknown perpetrators, believed to be more than one person, abducted at least 4 children, sexually abused them, and then discarded their bodies around Detroit. There may be ties to the Sheldon pedophile ring. Francis Sheldon was a son of the wealthy Sheldon family. He bought North Fox Island in Lake Michigan and set up a camp for troubled boys. He would then fly select children to the island, where they were met by a group of wealthy pedophilic men. This was literally the first Epstein Island. Sheldon fled the United States and died somewhere in Europe. Story 15. Mr. Gloves. Apparently, they have identified who he is and will announce it sometime this month or next. It has been long overdue and is one of the craziest horror stories no one has heard. Story 16. Maybe not as disturbing as others, but more personal, I guess. When I was about 10 years old, my family came back home from my grandparents' house, and the kitchen window was smashed. Our house looked like it had been turned upside down, with stuff thrown everywhere, drawers opened, and contents gone through. We called the police, and they took notes and genuinely tried to help, but there hadn't been any similar incidents. The strangest thing is that nothing was missing. What was the person who broke in looking for? I've always assumed they were either a desperate drug seeker or someone with the wrong address. Story 17. Three young girls, aged 17, 14, and 9 years old, were kidnapped from Seminary South Mall in Fort Worth, Texas, in 1974. There has been no trace of them since. Story 18. Asha Degree's disappearance is one of the most perplexing cases because none of it makes sense from the beginning. There are many different possibilities regarding what could have happened. Story 19. The Natasha Jate death. Story 20. The murders of the Dardeen family are a truly horrific crime. Story 21. Hinterkaifeck. An entire family and their newly hired maid were murdered. 4 of them were killed in a barn on their farm, and the maid and a toddler were killed in the house. There were strange occurrences in the weeks leading up to the murders, and apparently the killer stayed around for a few days afterwards. No arrests were made, though there were a few suspects. This is not a crime I know much about, but I really want to understand why the Yuba County Five took a strange detour while heading home from a basketball game and ended up dying. Story 22. I come from France, and one of the most famous unsolved cases to date is that of the Dupont de Ligonnès family. In Nantes, for children, their mother, and their 2 dogs were murdered and buried under the terrace of their house. The father has not been found to date. This happened in 2011, and Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès is one of the most wanted fugitives in the world. Story 23. The Cleveland Torso Murderer. From 1935 to 1938, a serial killer dismembered the heads and limbs of 12 to 20 people and left their torsos for others to find. The famous detective Elliot Ness was on the case, and the killer taunted him by leaving 2 torsos in full view of his office. The killer was never identified, nor were most of the victims. Story 24. I am surprised no one has mentioned the Madeleine McCann case. No one knows where she is still after 18 years. Story 25. There are many missing people and unidentified killers, but I would give anything to know what actually happened to Otto Warmbier. He went to North Korea, was arrested, and returned with catastrophic brain damage, only to die soon after. The official North Korean statement is that he had a heart attack, but I think that is false. That whole situation scared me a lot. Story 26. Leah Roberts was my age. She went on road trips like I did, but she disappeared on one. Her crashed vehicle was found in the Pacific Northwest, and she has never been found. The case is 25 years old now. Story 27. There is always this. Was a serial killer responsible for the murder of 6 women in East St. Louis? This expert thinks so. Story 28. Michael Dunahy. A little boy goes missing after his father turns his back. A massive search ensues, but the child is never found. Even now, the family still holds hope. A local investigative reporter has conducted an in-depth investigation and uncovered credible evidence that not only did the local police have a strong suspect, but the entire case was severely mishandled by the police forces. This case resonates with me because I tangentially knew the child. His father and my grandfather worked at the same place, and we would see each other at Christmas parties. It also helps that my mother and I lived in the area where he disappeared. I intend to ask my mother about some distinctive details of the suspected abductor. Story 29. The Las Cruces bowling alley massacre was the first one I could remember being so close to home as a kid, and it is still unsolved. Story 30. These are my absolute favorite posts because I find reading about unsolved mysteries really fascinating. I will be here all night reading these. One from my city that really bothers me is the death of Holly Bartlett. She was a visually impaired woman who was found below a bridge 300 meters from her home after being dropped off at her door one night. The police said she was drunk and blind, got confused and disoriented, and closed the case. However, she was extremely intelligent and capable of navigation despite her visual limitations. The police theory seems unlikely. The cab driver who dropped her off admitted to stealing from her and seems suspicious, but they never proved he was involved in her death. Story 31. The Texarkana Moonlight Murders. From February to May 1946, a person nicknamed the Phantom Killer went on a murdering spree in the town of Texarkana. resulting in 3 injuries and 5 deaths, in an event the tabloids dubbed the Texarkana Moonlight Murders. Most of the murders happened at night, and people in Texarkana were so scared that a citywide curfew was set in place to keep people off the streets after dark. Everyone was buying guns, ammunition, locks, and basically anything to protect themselves in massive quantities. Even the Texas Rangers got involved to help the police with their investigation. After just 3 months of fear and dread over who would be the next victim, the murders suddenly stopped, almost as if the murderer satisfied his bloodlust and ran off to avoid getting caught. Apparently, it worked. To this day, the killer has never been identified. These events later became the basis for the cult classic horror film, The Town That Dreaded Sundown. Story 32. 18 years ago, Inga Lotz was brutally bludgeoned to death in her room on the campus of Stellenbosch University. Her killer was arrested, but due to incompetence and significant financial influence, no one was jailed for the murder. Story 33. Diego Fernandez Lima is a recent unsolved case in Argentina. He disappeared in 1984 when he left the house, and his father died trying to find him. This happened after the coup that kidnapped many people, making it difficult to locate him. His family could not find him until recently. In May 2025, his body was found when a worker destroyed a garden wall in the house of the now-deceased rock star Gustavo Cerati. Diego was killed with a knife. The body was mostly buried in Cerati's neighbor's house, which belonged to his best friend's family. A search warrant has been issued to find his best friend, Christian Graf, as the alleged killer. Diego Fernandez Lima was allegedly killed by his best friend, and his body was buried in that house for 41 years. I hope his family finds justice. Story 34. I am from Iowa, so the disappearances of Johnny Gosch and Eugene Martin, 2 paperboys in the Des Moines area in the early 1980s, are big news. One man who used to come to our Westside Senior Center was the last person to see Gosch. He was a suspect for a while. The probable kidnapping of Jody Huizentraut in Mason City on June 25, 1995, is another unsolved Iowa case. I asked a man who was then married to a local psychic if she thought Jody was alive. He shook his head and mouthed, "No." Story 35. Angela Hammond was abducted while using a payphone, talking to her husband, and was pregnant at the time. There was a scream, and a male voice said, "I didn't need to use the phone anyway." Her husband drove around looking for her when a green pickup truck passed, and he heard her screaming his name. He slammed into reverse, which damaged his transmission, and his vehicle came to a stop as he helplessly watched the green Ford drive away. It had a decal of a fish on the back windshield. Story 36. Kevin Collins. He is not as famous or well remembered as some other disappearances from the 1980s, but he was my age and disappeared from the part of California where I lived. I was 9 and his missing flyer was everywhere. I can still see his face. He was last seen at a bus stop after basketball practice. It made a strong impression on me, showing that you could be having an ordinary day and vanish without a trace. Story 37. That billionaire couple in Toronto appears to have been killed by a hitman. It is not clear who hired him. There is still uncertainty about where the money from the estate went. Story 38. Any case where someone seemingly vanishes without a trace. Brandon Swanson, Brian Schaefer, Jason Jalkowski, Asha Degree, even the Sauter children, because not one piece of bone was found in the ashes of the house. The fact that investigators hit dead ends with no clues, no evidence, and no witnesses coming forward is unsettling. I would rather definitively know that my loved one was murdered, even if the case remains unsolved, because at least there would be some kind of answer. Story 39. Norway is home to countless cases. One of the most disturbing yet lesser-known unsolved crimes in history is the case of the Istel woman in Norway, 1970. Her charred body was discovered in a remote forested area near Bergen, with all identifying marks meticulously removed. Labels were cut from her clothes, teeth filed down, and fingerprints scratched off, making her identity a complete mystery. The investigation revealed multiple fake identities and passports, suggesting possible espionage during the Cold War. The crime scene contained bizarre clues like coded notes, unusual belongings, and traces of poison. But despite extensive efforts, No suspects were identified. Officially, her death remains unresolved, with theories ranging from suicide to homicide. Story 40. Brooklyn Farthing went missing on June 22, 2013. The case haunts me because it happened in my small hometown, where everyone knows everyone. We all know exactly who did it, but local news coverage, search parties, cadaver dogs, and every tool you can think of to find her have been used. It is just so strange that her body was never found. It is especially strange considering how quickly she was reported missing and the searches began. Story 41. The Ketty Cabin murders were an unsolved quadruple homicide that occurred in Ketty, California, on April 11 and 12, 1981, in Cabin 28 of the Ketty Resort. The victims were Glenna Sue Sharp, her son John, and his friend Dana Wingate, who were found murdered in the cabin. Sue's daughter, Tina, was initially reported missing. Her skull and other bones were found 3 years after the murders, miles away. Story 42. I grew up around the area of the Texas killing fields, and there remain many unanswered questions about the bodies that were dumped there, who dumped them, and how they are linked to other bodies dumped in the area at the same time. There were multiple serial killers operating simultaneously. I have heard about it my entire life. Story 43. Diamond and Tianda Bradley were little girls on the south side of Chicago who were left home alone while their mother was at work. They left a note saying they were going to the store to buy candy and then vanished. There was a podcast about it that made the mother and her boyfriend seem suspicious, but Chicago police have also been known to be racist. Story 44. The Zodiac Killer case is claimed to be solved, but it seems the police just want to congratulate themselves over nothing. Story 45. The Arushi Hemraj murder in India. A whodunit through and through. The question was not who the suspects were, but who were not. One of the worst examples of forensic application in criminal cases. The murder was also a media circus. If you watch those news reports now and think about the labeling of the 13-year-old victim, it would make your blood boil. The Stoneman in India. An unknown serial killer or killers wreaked havoc not in one, Mumbai, but allegedly 2, Kolkata, major cities at opposite ends of the country, with more than a 5-year gap between incidents. The killer's basic modus operandi was dropping a 60-plus-pound stone slab on the head of a sleeping homeless individual during the night. The worst part was crushed faces and heads made victim identification nearly impossible. Loved ones may still be waiting to hear from them, unaware they died long ago. Junko Furuta murder in Japan. Technically, the case is solved. However, it is believed many more people were involved, directly or indirectly, who were never identified or detained, and they got away with it. Story 46. The Springfield 3. Oakleal. Not as well known, but Mary Shotwell Little was a newlywed who disappeared from a trendy Atlanta shopping center in 1965. The Mysterious Brews podcast provided the best telling of the story among all the podcasts I have listened to. Story 47. Every time this topic comes up, I wish we could find justice for Bill and Peggy Stevenson. They were good people, seemingly innocent of harming a fly, and they were taken in an incredibly gruesome and terrible way. The police have not released details, hoping they will find the person that took them. Story 48. St. Louis Jane Doe, an 8 to 10-year-old girl, was found brutally murdered, raped, and beheaded in an abandoned apartment building in 1983. Her missing head has never been found. The worst part is that there has been a major effort to identify her. Last I read, Cece Moore was hung up on twice by alleged family members, and the family member linked to the girl had their DNA removed from the database. This suggests potential interference in the investigation. Story 49. Okay, I am cheating because this case was recently solved, but it is dear to my heart because it was a high-profile missing person case from my hometown, and you would never guess where the missing woman was found. The case of Arlene McLean. In 1999, a woman who was depressed decided to drive off a bridge in the middle of the night. The bridge was located next to a popular beach with shallow waters. The bridge is surrounded by wetlands, and many animals from the ocean would beach there because the waters were so shallow. You would think the water under the bridge was shallow, but it was not. The police could not find her and started intensely questioning the husband because they thought he was involved. The town was very tight-knit, so the whole village turned against the husband. 22 years later, in 2021, divers were diving under the bridge and found two cars. One of them belonged to Arlene McLean. They found her in the car and concluded that she drove into the water all those years ago. There is no memorial or anything at that bridge, but whenever I visit my mom, I think about how deep the water under the bridge is. Story 50. Bryce Laspiza. My gut feeling is that he is not alive, but the disturbing part for me is all the time he was sitting at the side of the road and all the little things that happened to him. Why did his parents not drop everything and go get him? Story 51. Heidi Allen, especially after listening to the YouTube videos with Jennifer speaking. She knows and she lies and karma will get her. Story 52. There was a case on Unsolved Mysteries that still haunts me to this day. A man killed 3 women, former co-workers, in a gas station or convenience store somewhere in January 1993. If I recall correctly, he had been fired and came back one evening when they were working, forced them all to lie down on the ground, and then shot them in the head one by one. I cannot imagine how awful their final moments must have been. Terrifying and horrible. I wonder if that man ever got caught. Story 53. I grew up in Puerto Rico in the 1990s. There was a boy around my age who went missing not far from where I lived. His name was Rolando Salas, also known as Rolandito. He was playing in a park near his home and suddenly disappeared. No one saw anything. There were no witnesses or evidence left behind, just gone. People have suspected everything and everyone, from his parents to cults and organ traffickers. I remember as a child watching the news and hearing his mother talk about how she prays every night for his return and that she sees his face in the stars. It was absolutely heartbreaking. Story 54. I remember reading about the story of Yu Manhan. He was a 15-year-old boy from Hong Kong with autism and intellectual disabilities, nonverbal with the mental capacity of about a 2-year-old. One day, while out with his mother, he suddenly let go of her hand at a train station and wandered off. Somehow, he ended up at the border crossing into mainland China without any identification. Border officers on both sides failed to recognize that he was a missing Hong Kong resident or understand his disability, and he was handed over to mainland Chinese authorities. After that, he vanished. The search and investigation were a disaster, complicated by Hong Kong and China politics and jurisdictions. No one knows what happened next. Some believe he may have died soon after from exposure or dehydration, unable to communicate or get help. Others think people may have seen him in distress or even dead but did not intervene out of fear or indifference. His mother never gave up. She spent years searching the streets for him, convinced he was alive while she was mocked by the public. She passed away without ever learning what happened to her son. Story 55. My Nan's 2 friends, Susan and Gary, went missing in 1970. They were not found for a few months, and the case remained unsolved for 30 years. At one point, people blamed foxes for taking Susan's underwear, even though she was wearing clothes. Susan had been wearing my Nan's clothes because they had played in the river earlier that day. Story 56. JonBenet Ramsey. I feel like the father did it, but regardless, it was a horrific crime with no resolution. The murder of Ebby Stepak has always bothered me. She accused some men of sexual assault, disappeared, then her body was found 3 years later in a drain pipe. The police tried to prove that she committed suicide by stuffing herself into a drain pipe. I suspect they are covering something up. Story 57. The Atlanta child murders involved 29 black young people, mostly boys, who were abducted and murdered. The killings continued with little effort to stop them until a young girl spoke directly to President Jimmy Carter about the situation. This brought national attention to the case. Wayne Williams was eventually arrested and found guilty of 2 of the murders but was suspected of involvement in many more. However, there was limited proof linking him to the other killings, so the actual killer or killers may never have been punished. There was also speculation that the Ku Klux Klan or another white supremacist group was responsible for some of the murders. In the end, the blame was placed on Williams. It appears the police wanted to find someone to hold accountable to reduce public pressure. Story 58. JonBenet Ramsey. I have another case as well, the Lewis Clark Valley serial killer, also known as the Snake River Killer. I was living there during that time. Police know who it is but have not made an arrest. The same person is the strongest suspect in the Diane Taylor murder in Chicago, 1965. Story 59. The West Memphis 3 case is still unsolved. Cassie Compton in Stuttgart, Arkansas was around 20 years old. Personally, I was near a liquor store robbery a few blocks from where I was working. The employee was killed, and the store was set on fire afterwards. They found his car on fire on the interstate at the same time the fire department found his body in the store. I was listening on a scanner. This was in 1987. Story 60. I will never get over Kramer's frown. There is so much evidence, but none of it leads anywhere. It's like we are so close, but the piece that has the answers has vanished. Story 61. The questionable death of a young, missing autistic boy named Jonathan Shea in Missouri in 2018 still affects me deeply. This case flew under the radar, but no missing child has ever affected me more. I still get emotional when I think about him. Although the case is technically solved and labeled an accident, there were some strange circumstances that made me believe there was foul play involved. Story 62. Lindsay Buzayak. A carefully planned murder with multiple people involved. But why Lindsay? What did she know? And why use such a bloody means of killing her when a garrote would have been much cleaner? Story 63. JonBenet Ramsey. The family did it, probably the brother, probably an accident, but everyone seems to want a difficult solution. Feels so obvious it haunts me. Story 64. 10-year-old Blake Dickus and his stepmother China. July 24, 2006. Indiana. If you look for the footage of Blake's parents' news interviews, they are heartbreaking, especially his mother. The biological parents have been cleared, and the murders remain unsolved. Story 65. In Nova Scotia, Canada, there is a case of a mountain biker who disappeared one day. It was a relatively urban trail. His car was found, and the woods and trail were searched for weeks. There was no evidence of a crash on the trail and no bike wheel tracks anywhere. Some wondered if he had run away from his wife and family, but no evidence was found to support this, such as sightings at gas stations or driving off. He genuinely just vanished. More recently, about a month ago, the same thing happened with 2 children. I am heartbroken for their family. No discernible evidence has been released as the case is still under investigation. Story 66. A girl I went to high school with was at the beach in Florida with her family when she was probably 4 or 5 years old. She had an older sister who was about 13 or 14 years old. Her sister went for a walk down the beach and was never seen again. They believe she was abducted. Another case involves a woman I grew up near. Her sister, Jackie Levitz, lived in Vicksburg, Mississippi. She was presumably either murdered or abducted from her home. She lived in a house on a bluff overlooking the Mississippi River and was an heiress who had inherited millions. There were signs of foul play, such as a blood stain on the carpet and all the bed linen stripped off, but she was never seen or heard from again. This case was featured on the television show Unsolved Mysteries with Robert Stack and remains unsolved 30 years later. Story 67. The Albuquerque Jane Doe is now being called Becca Jane Doe, as they recently received a tip indicating that was her name. Story 68. Karina Holmer, a Swedish nanny whose upper body was found in a dumpster in Boston about 30 years ago. Her lower half was never found. Her father asked, "What part of her am I getting back?" Story 69. Jennifer Kess. This case has always bothered me. It was around the time of Kaylee Anthony, Jessica Lunsford, and Carly Brucia in Sarasota, within a year or 2 of each other. I had moved to Florida a few years earlier and lived not far from Orlando. There was a lot of significant activity happening in succession. Though the cases of Jessica, Carly, and Kaylee were solved, this one never went away. I remember Jennifer's father pleading for any information. It was just heartbreaking. Story 70. I'm Australian. The 3 Beaumont children went missing in Adelaide in 1966. There have been periodic attempts to find their bodies, but nothing definitive has been found or proven. Their parents died never knowing what happened to them. Jane, the eldest, was about my age. I turned 70 this year. Story 71. Laura Bradbury, Joshua Tree Campsite. 3-year-old who wandered off and was never found. A skull was found years later but could not be proven to be hers. Story 72. Susie Lamplow was a London estate agent who went missing mid-afternoon in July 1986, while apparently showing a house to a client. The prime suspect, John Cannon, died in prison last November at age 70. It was very likely him for various compelling reasons, including DNA found in his car later on. However, there are other aspects to the case and alternative interpretations of the evidence that lead to different conclusions. It was probably Cannon, and the police even tried to charge him, but the prosecutor said the evidence was insufficient. Story 73. The homicide of Oki Al-Kite in Aurora, Colorado, 2004, needs to be solved. This case is seriously dark and disturbing. Anyone who has never heard of it should look into it. It is completely solvable. Story 74. Brittany Wood. I don't think it is the most disturbing case ever, but it still haunts me. I regularly search online to see if there are any updates. Story 75. It has to be Asha Degree. A 9-year-old girl in the year 2000 got up one night, packed a bag, and walked out of her house in North Carolina. She was seen walking at the side of a highway in the dark, during a rainstorm, in pajamas. When a car stopped to see if she was okay, she ran into the woods and was never seen again. Searches turned up nothing until 17 months later when her backpack was found at a construction site 30 miles away from where she was seen by the highway. She was not a troublesome child, was not from a troubled home, had no associations with suspicious people, and neither did her family. No one knows why she ran away, where she could have been going, or what may have happened to her. Was she being groomed by someone who told her to leave? So, who and how? She was not on the internet, did not have a cell phone, and did not spend time alone with adults she did not know, so it would have had to be a family member, a school staff member, or a family member of a friend. But there are no suspects to this day. Was it a plot with her friends? No other kids ran away and none ever came forward. Was she trying to escape something? If so, it is even more mysterious because there was no evidence of abuse, and her whole family has denied any such claims to this day. Was it some kind of child snatcher? If so, this appears to be an isolated incident as it does not fit any known modus operandi. And again, there are no suspects. Was she in some kind of psychosis? This is a popular theory, but there were no signs before that night. So for the first apparent symptoms to be a delusion so intense that a child would run away into a stormy night and flee at the first sign of help into the dark woods seems unlikely. Last year, search warrants were issued based on DNA evidence for a property near her disappearance. Reportedly, a member of the family who owns the property drunkenly confessed to killing Asha, but no charges were ever filed, and no new evidence has been released. Story 76. David Parker Ray abducted women using his adult daughter, Glenda Jean Ray, and a younger accomplice named Dennis Roy Yancey. Dennis and Glenda often lured women to David by spiking their drinks in bars or inviting acquaintances or friends to his house. David also had a girlfriend named Cindy Hendy, who helped find victims. He restrained the women, assaulted them, and tortured them with whips, chains, shocks, and other cruel methods. He used homemade devices made from PVC pipe with nails. He also played a tape describing his intentions while the women were in his soundproof trailer where he held and tortured them. Cindy also participated in the assaults and torture. The unsolved aspect is that no murder victims have been identified. One woman escaped and 2 others were released, but David Parker Ray is suspected of killing many women. No bodies have been found. He died shortly after being convicted, before he could reveal the locations of any bodies. Dennis Yancey confessed that Ray had him strangle one victim to death. But when Yancey led investigators to the supposed burial site, the body was missing. It is unclear whether Yancey lied, forgot, or if someone, likely David or an accomplice, moved the body. Story 77. I know it is a relatively recent case, so it is not surprising that it is unsolved. However, for as long as I live, I do not think I will ever get over Emily Pike's death. Story 78. The JonBenet Ramsey murder. The Jack the Ripper Murders. The murder of Lizzie Borden's father and stepmother. Story 79. Kim Morrow of J. Maine has been missing for decades. She left home one night to spend time with friends and never came back. Her mother died of cancer shortly thereafter, but her sisters and father are still searching for her. They still post photos of her throughout the region, hoping someone will help bring them closure. Mr. Morrow is over 80 now, and I have a son who just turned 1. It feels different now, and I cannot imagine him passing without knowing what happened to his daughter. Truly haunts me. Story 80. Ray Rivera. I think about him every once in a while. It is strange how he died, and it is surprising that no one has been able to provide a sufficient explanation for his death or create a proper timeline of events leading up to it. His family went above and beyond to try to find him, while the police were incompetent. Ray definitely knew something he should not have, and I am certain his best friend either knows why he died or was directly involved. Story 81. The Morenci boys who disappeared in Michigan on Thanksgiving in 2010. I was around the same age as the boys at the time, so it was deeply haunting that the 3 of them could just vanish and all the adults had conflicting stories. I believe a judge recently ruled that they were killed that night. It is still very troubling that we don't know exactly what happened to them. Story 82. When I was a kid, there was a 7-Eleven near me that we would stop at most Saturdays on the way home from bowling. One Saturday morning on the way to bowling, we noticed the store's parking lot was full of police cars and vans. They were still there when we passed by on the way home more than 8 hours later. My mom worked at the bowling alley, and we would hang around there all day. This was years ago before social media, so it was not until the evening news that we learned the story. In the early morning hours, a customer walked in and found the store empty, so they called the police. 2 employees and 1 other person were found in a cooler. All 3 had been shot in the head. Since there was no blood anywhere else, the police concluded that they had been led into the cooler and executed. The store had been robbed. I also remember that 10 years later it was back in the news because it was still unsolved. I do not recall hearing anything else about it, so I assume it still is unsolved. Story 83. So many missing or oddly suicidal Black people. The biggest case for me recently, and I confess I had forgotten until I was reminded, is that it still has not been solved. The poor boy found rolled up in a mat in the high school gym. Story 84. I was just reminded of this local case because the police are asking for tips again. In 2010, firefighters were called to the home of 76-year-old Livia Bairns. Her home was in flames, and they could hear her calling for help from the basement. Firefighters discovered her bound with zip ties and unable to free herself while her home was burning. They got her out, but she died the next day in the hospital. It seems the main clue is that the brand of zip ties used to bind Livia was not a common brand sold in many stores. It is shocking that someone would do that to anyone, especially an elderly woman living alone. Story 85. Tracy and patient lived near me and was close to my age. She was found strangled with pantyhose and dumped in the Waitakere Ranges. Story 86. The yogurt shop murders in 1991 involved 4 young, innocent girls who were shot in the back of the head. The 13-year-old girl was sexually assaulted. The shop was set on fire, making it impossible to recover any fingerprints or evidence due to the water used by firefighters. A small amount of semen was recovered but is highly degraded due to the heat. Austin, Texas will never forget this terrible crime. There is a documentary on HBO about this case. Story 87. Darrente Martin, a 19-year-old, was found with a gunshot wound to his head in the attic of a known white supremacist. His death was ruled a suicide. The family requested another autopsy, which concluded it was a case of violence. No arrests have been made. Story 88. Some crimes do not just stay in police files. They stay in your head. Every detail, every unanswered question looping over and over. Share your story below. Maybe someone else has been haunted by the same crime. Story 89. The active serial killer case known as the New England serial killer is absolutely terrifying, considering multiple bodies have been found along hiking trails and wooded areas throughout Rhode Island, New Hampshire, Connecticut, and Massachusetts. Story 90. One local to me is the Sauter family disappearance. 5 children went missing after a house fire in the 1940s. The father apparently had some connections to organized crime. The parents insisted for decades afterward that they occasionally received calls and letters from the missing children, telling them they were alive and safe, but that the family should not come looking for them. It is a pretty wild rabbit hole if you want to look into it. Story 91. Robin Trevisano. It happened near where I lived, and she was really trying to get her life together. Story 92. In 1996, Tucson, Arizona, a 7-year-old named Karen Grajeda went missing from in front of her apartment while playing after school. She just disappeared. I am not sure why this case haunts me, as I watch and read tons of true crime content, yet it does. I guess, in part, it is because her mother still does not know where she is or what happened after all these years. Story 93. There is a documentary that I have watched. It was clear that a group of young men were involved. They mentioned a concrete pour on a new building very close to the apartment where she was last seen, as well as the dumpster. However, the local police made mistakes, and the bar that served her was also to blame. Check out the documentary if you can find it. Story 94. Adrienne Salinas' disappearance and murder remain a tragic case. She called a taxi to meet her at a gas station down the road and never arrived. It has been 12 years, and only her body was found, without a head, miles away from where she disappeared. This is a simplified version of the events, and the full case is much more complex. It appears to have been completely random, which is frightening. She was also a friend of a friend, which added a personal connection for me. Story 95. I am from Newfoundland, Canada. A few years ago, a woman disappeared. The police always suspected it was the boyfriend and questioned him. He ended up taking his own life. Every so often, the police issue a plea, saying that someone must know what happened and where her remains are. She left behind a young daughter. It was always unsettling to walk in the woods for a while after, wondering if you would stumble across the body. There is also a case of a woman who disappeared without a trace in a rural community. Residents often pointed fingers at the husband, who maintained his innocence and even spoke to the media. This case might be solved now. It is still before the courts, but they arrested him a year or two ago. The trial is embargoed because it involved an undercover police officer. I am interested to see what the verdict will be and what the media will be able to publish. Story 96. Pearl Pinson, a young teenager kidnapped on the way to school, was rescued after the kidnapper was killed in a shootout while hiding her. Story 97. I cannot remember her name, so maybe someone can help me. There was a woman who was abducted in the 1980s or 1990s from her work parking lot. Her co-workers witnessed the abduction and could do nothing to stop it. She has not been heard from since. I am not thinking of Dorothy Jane Scott, as I am about 90% sure the victim in the case I am thinking of was a black woman. The cases are very similar, and if I recall correctly, her co-workers might have given a description of the man whose car she got into or who got into her car. I am fuzzy on the details. There is also the St. Louis Jane Doe from 1983. The body of a little girl was found in the basement of an abandoned house with her head missing, which remains unlocated to this day. This has made identifying her very difficult. Only through DNA evidence have potential relatives been identified, but the extended family does not want to speak to the police. She was obviously cared for because she had painted nails and nice clothes on, but there are no records of any missing children in nearby schools, and nobody has claimed to know her. The sweater she was wearing was sent by the police to a psychic but was lost in the mail. I really hope she is identified soon and can be buried with her real name. This case is very sad. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.